Hello, everyone. Welcome to the history of ...
On this show, we'll be learning about everything and anything, from the unexpected origins all the way up to what it is now.
Each week we have a category, and then each of us here will be talking about an item, event, or something of our choosing and sharing a little history about it.
And our favorite fact, that something we found the most interesting about the topic we shared, will be featured as a Did You Know fact. All right, let's get into it. But before we begin, here's a little introduction from us, your lovely knowledge sharers.
My name is Jenna, and I have the attention span of a goldfish, so I can talk about things that are meant to entertain you.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a person who likes to be entertained.
And hello, my name's Nadine, and I have my fair share of entertaining my friends.
For today's episode, we'll be talking about the history of entertainment.
Before movies became a part of entertainment today, let's see how they came to be. Movies are just stories shown in a visual and auditory form, but it didn't start quite as fancy. Edward Muybridge's The Horse in Motion is one of the most famously known starts to film. In 1878, Muybridge had gone to a racetrack and set up 24 different cameras to capture if at any point all four of the horse's legs left the ground at the same time. The results brought on the closest thing at the time we had to capturing movement. Now, not only did this man create the footage through photos, but he also created one of the first projectors called the zoopraxiscope. Now, this device would spin and show multiple photos moving to create a moving picture. It's sort of like those flip books you would make as a kid with the stick people jumping on a page. You may have actually seen a more modern zoopraxiscope in movies such as The Conjuring. Over time, they became more of a kid's toy that you really don't see today. All that inspired Thomas Edison to gain an interest in studying motion picture theory and to create his own filming equipment. Now, Thomas Edison and a young engineer named William Dickson worked together in 1891 to create something similar to the zoopraxiscope called a kinetoscope. The device was a cabinet with a window on top. Only one person at a time could look through. They would see moving images when they looked in, watching a short visual story. These machines were placed around different amusement parks, hotel lobbies, and penny arcades throughout Europe. This technology brought money, and this got a lot of tech people thinking how they can create something to be able to reach a bigger audience, faster and on a bigger screen. This got two inventor brothers from France, Auguste and Louis Lumiere, to get crafting. Now, in 1895, they created a cinematographe, which eventually was the start of the word cinema, which was a lightweight projector that also worked as a printer and a camera. This portable and lightweight machine made it easy to take with you to capture moments and for entertainment. It was used to capture a little bit more of mundane things. Now, this clip was actually featured at the first ever commercial film screening, which was shown in a small cafe in France. The simple clip showed people leaving the factory and has no sound, as back then, film was captured without a sound. This blew people's minds back then and felt unreal, sometimes being an overwhelming experience for some. Now, people knew this would get boring and fast, and there needed to be more entertainment than just simple mundane activities. Now, in the early 1900s, people were looking to add some pizzazz to their cinema experience, which encouraged people to go out and create a lot more. Edwin S. Porter began to get more creative with his shorts and shots and would film more stage performances. Now, I'm going to let you guys watch just a snippet of one of his earlier films, The Great Train Robbery. Now, as you can tell, the films went from being silent to music playing in the back, as there was still no way to synchronize the sound and the film. Color came in between 1899 and 1902, but still only music. That is until 1927, when Warner Brothers, a company we still all know very well today, released a short film called Jazz Singer.
I never fail. If you don't get a letter, then you know I'm in jail. Hey, hey, don't cry, Tootsie, don't cry. Kiss me, Tootsie, goodbye.
At this point, movies were longer in length and slowly built up to create more of what we have today. From props to special effects, film has come a long way to get to the technique we have today. Now, did you know movies used to be called Nickelodeons and would cost people about 5 cents to view? Going to see a live performance was seen as a luxury for the upper class, while cinemas were still used for something for more the middle and lower class for entertainment.
Dang, I didn't know they used to be for the lower class. Nowadays, anyone can walk in and pay an absurd amount of money for a ticket.
I mean, I still kind of am lower class, so I guess I fit right in.
Who would have thought people were so easily amused by pictures getting flipped around real quick?
I mean, I know I don't have the attention span to sit and watch movies for hours on end. Something I prefer, it makes even more sense, is going to an amusement park. Now, amusement parks were a product of ever-evolving fairs and festivals. It all began with themed festivals in Europe around the Renaissance, so 1300 to 1600. The festivals were usually centered around religious holidays or major harvests, and people would gather to enjoy food and admire things brought from other places. The first version of the carousel was created during this time. You would sit in a basket and be spun around a pole. Games would test hand-eye coordination. Some examples are throwing javelins through hoops, along with archery and darts. Crowds also gathered to watch knights joust, with the horses and the guys with the poles. Jumping ahead to the 18th century, pleasure gardens started popping up in major cities in Europe. They were created to keep the middle class entertained, since during this time, people had extra money to spend and some free time they needed to fill. The pleasure gardens allowed visitors to stroll through gardens or well-manicured areas while enjoying live music, plays, jesters, acrobats, and fireworks shows. This became the prime spot to socialize, meet new people they may not have encountered otherwise, and show off their best clothes. Priorities. It was also a place for architects and artists to show off their latest builds and creations. In the mid-1700s, pleasure gardens made their way across the ocean to America, with the first ones opening in New York City. This is also when more rides were added to the mix. When we reach the 1800s, things start changing a bit more. So trolley companies paid a flat rate for electricity, so they wanted people to ride the trolley outside of peak hours to make more money. So they built small parks with rides, picnic areas, and games to entice people to use the trolley outside of the typical work hours. One of the most famous amusement parks that showed up at the time was the result of a well-thought-out rail line to Coney Island. Locals viewed Coney Island as an affordable escape to the seaside after a long week of school and work during the summer. People would make trips on the subway from outer suburbs to visit the amusement parks, and they had games, rides, street performers, and even fortune tellers. In 1884, the first roller coaster in the US was made. It was called the Switchback Gravity Pleasure. Odd name, but okay. It was invented by Lamarcus A. Thompson. The roller coaster had a max speed of 5 miles an hour, and it had a max height of 50 feet. An absolutely thrilling experience for those who took a ride. This ride opened the gateway for multiple parks to be made on Coney Island, which is still famous for its rides and games to this day. Chicago was also becoming well known for its amusement parks at the time, and in 1893, the people in charge of the Columbian Exposition, a fair that brought in guests from all around the world, were looking to create something spectacular. They made and debuted the world's first Ferris wheel, a 264-foot ride that welcomed over 1.4 million guests over the next 5 months. That's a lot of people in the 1800s. The Columbian Exposition also came up with the idea of having signature colors, fonts, and whimsical designs, and assigning them to specific amusement parks. The amusement park industry was booming, and by 1920, there were hundreds of parks across America. Around this time, keywords such as the tallest, the fastest, and the longest were being used in advertisements to try and bring in more people to certain parks. During this time, parkgoers were dressed to the nines, as going out to an amusement park was considered a formal event. Their coasters at the time were built out of wood and would wobble and creak as the cars would go over. Personal nightmare. Seatbelts and safety precautions also didn't exist back then, so people would lift out of their seats when going down the slope. Then the Great Depression happened, and most parks shut down. Some people would still visit occasionally to escape the harsh realities of life. In 1955, Disneyland became the nation's first large park that operated around a specific theme.
Disneyland, Southern California's $17 million playground dedicated to children, both young and old, opened its gates to the public today. These pictures were taken yesterday by Channel 8 cameraman Mel Forbes during a special preview showing of the Wonderland to invited guests. Views from a helicopter show the huge 60-acre playland. The park is the brainchild of Walt Disney and includes such creations as a Mississippi River showboat, a horse-drawn trolley, and Snow White's castle. 30,000 persons streamed through the park at this initial opening, and one had all he could do in some instances to keep from being crushed. But visitors, some of them familiar to many, like Eddie Fisher, accepted the inconvenience. From 4:30 to 6 o'clock in the afternoon, a live ABC telecast brought opening ceremonies to folks across the nation. It was presented over Channel 8 in San Diego. Then Governor Knight and Disney led a parade of Disney's imaginative characters through the grounds. There was Alice in Wonderland, Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and such famous persons as Davy Crockett, Fess Parker, and Annie Oakley. Disneyland hopes to handle 60,000 persons a day when it's in full operation. Officials say they hope to gross $10 million a year. Tickets are $1 for adults and 50 cents for children. The park has 35 rides, and there's an extra cost to ride each one, starting from a quarter for adults and a dime for children.
To be a great business move. Kids loved going to a dinosaur or Wild West themed park. During the 90s and the 2000s, it was all about pushing the limits of what was thought to be possible. Rides seemed to defy logic at the time, as inverted roller coasters were wowing the crowds. The rides now featured twists, turns, and loops. Airtime was also an enticing feature. Newer rides would have riders lifted out of their seats, which got the attention of all of the adrenaline junkies. While rides and parks have come a long way, there are still elements of the original that exist today. The go-to snacks are still hot dogs, popcorn, and cotton candy. Some parks also include wooden roller coasters and old games as a tribute to the first parks. Theme parks continue to be a fun escape from everyday life and a great place to have an adrenaline rush and overall leave your worries behind. Well, with the exception of worrying about throwing up on a ride. Did you know that Denmark is home of the oldest operating amusement park in the world? It opened its doors in 1583.
Wow, it's been that long. The question that I have for you guys now is, when are we going to an amusement park together?
When are you going to pay for my ticket?
Who said I was?
I don't know what you want to do with me throwing up after a roller coaster.
I'm assuming I'm driving, so
You are, Jenna.
you can
Of
pay for
course
my
you are.
ticket.
Why not?
That's a
You know
fair
what,
deal.
Susan? We know what we're doing.
Oh, the no money I have to.
Fun fact for you guys, though, I hate rides. To be more specific, amusement park rides scare me because of trauma I kind of had as a kid where I was forced on one. But I'll still go for the vibes, obviously. But you know what is something we kind of did that was entertaining and fun recently? It was going out bowling for my birthday. Speaking of, let me tell you all about the history of bowling. The earliest known forms of bowling can be traced all the way back to 3200 BC in ancient Egypt. It looks a lot different from the modern bowling that we see now. There wasn't much information on the early stages of bowling until 2,000 years ago. The oldest discovery made by archaeologists are some rather familiar bowling equipment. In the tomb of an ancient Egyptian's child, there was a set of pins and bowling balls. There were also different traces of the game being played in ancient Germany, Yemen, and Finland. Archaeologists found balls of stone and pins that were used for a regional game called Ula Maika in Polynesia. Another inspired form of bowling was evolving within the Empire of the Romans about 2,000 years ago too. Roman Roman soldiers would toss various stone objects with the goal being to toss them as close as possible to the other stone objects. Centuries later, this evolved into the Italian game bocce, otherwise known as outdoor bowling. In the 5th century AD, the game started transforming into the bowling we're more familiar with now. But not exactly, because it happens about a century or two later. Anyways, bowling was a ceremonial ritual. The pins were representations of evil spirits or demons, and participants in the ritual would topple them using various stone objects to free their souls and cleanse their spirits. As centuries went by, instead of stone, the balls and pins were switched to be made from wood. Bowling would be played in cloisters of cathedrals with a custom parishioners would follow. They would be given a ball and asked to throw it at the kegel, meaning heathen, which in this case would be a pin. If they get a hit, that means they aren't a sinner. If they miss, then it means the parishioner must attend service more often. The sport did become more popular and a favorite for the soldiers in Great Britain of King Edward III's reign. Eventually, bowling wasn't a ritual anymore and separated from the church. I don't know how it was in the first place. It became a secular sport across Europe, and it wasn't unusual to see bowling greens at the estates of those who could afford to. Did you know bowling had a bad reputation and that it was even banned? Bowling earned a bad reputation around this time because of its association to gambling and drinking. There were too many soldiers of the Royal Army who would spend their free time bowling instead of practicing archery, which was essential to national defense. So, what does the king do? He bans bowling because it became a great risk of national security. Eventually, the game made its way to the United States due to Dutch and English immigrants' efforts. The first written materials about bowling appeared in the year 1818. Quite a favorite year of mine. It was written in Washington Irving's book, Rip Van Winkle. Initially, bowling was just a game with 9 pins in America, but since bowling was still associated with drinking and gambling, Connecticut banned the game 9 pins. Who doesn't like creating loopholes to do something fun and totally not illegal whatsoever? The loophole in this scenario was adding a 10th pin, so the game would be called 10 pin instead because they banned 9 pins. Yeah. Unfortunately, there was a town in New York State that passed a bill banning the game despite the number of pins. Look at them go, thinking ahead. Nonetheless, the people still found a way to just keep playing by organizing games away from the major parts of cities. Bowling was typically enjoyed outdoors, but when it evolved into an indoor sport, there were indoor bowling alleys that were built in New York City in the year 1840. With the German immigrants moving towards the West, the game grew to be more popular in the States. This led to the formation of the American Bowling Congress in 1895 after basic rules and regulations were established. All right, here's some fast bowling facts for you. The first championship tournament was ever held in 1901. The first rubber ball used for bowling was used in 1905 and called Evertrue. This ball, made of mineralite, was developed by the Brunswick Corporation, and it was revolutionary and called Brunswick's Mineralite and introduced in 1906. Sweden installed the first 10-pin lanes beginning in the 20th century. Great Britain embraced bowling in the middle of World War II by installing several hundreds of lanes at American military camps. And bowling went through technological improvements such as electronic scoring and monitors showing the ball's speed and path. It's our last show. Here's another Did You Know fact. If you might have been to a bowling alley before, which you've heard we have, you might have seen the bowling alley workers run down an alley for maintenance, like pushing a bowling ball down further or cleaning up a stray pin. Well, back then, they would have to go back every time someone bowled a ball to put the pins back up. They were called pin boys, and it wasn't until 1952 when an automatic pin spotter was innovated by a patent that the American Machine Foundry Company acquired. Later on, this led to NBC's decision to air championship bowling for the first time.
Wow, a pin boy. Is that kind of just like the same concept as a bat boy in baseball?
Probably. I can't tell you much about bat boys, though. I don't know anything about baseball.
I actually thought about that. That's really interesting.
No, my mind immediately went to a bat boy, whose job is to just, pick up a bat.
To pick up the bat and
Yeah.
run, like that's their only job.
I'd also be awful at the job of putting pins back up because I would knock them all over immediately.
Also, why bat boy? Why pin boy? Why not pin girl?
Women didn't grow.
You're right,
Come
Jenna.
on.
That's crazy.
We're talking about history here.
Speaking of, that was a ton and lot of history to say.
Well, luckily, that's all the history we have for this week.
And the semester. We hope you learned that history can be more interesting than your usual high school history classes have led you to believe.
Thank you for tuning in to our final episode of the history of ...
Bye.